Everyone, thanks for joining for another episode of this series that I'm calling Scars and Wisdom. And this is a conversation space where we are honoring what we have gone through, those tough and challenging experiences in our life that we've gone through, but we're also honoring and recognizing the wisdom that lives in us because of it. And today I have Maria Belanic with us, and she is going to add a lot of good conversation to this space. So, Maria, why don't you let us know what you're up to in this world?
Thank you, Karen. And I'm so glad to have this conversation with you. I always go now, grief is my lane. Not that I chose it, but it has chosen me. So I am a bereaved mom and a certified grief educator because of experiencing grief and wanting to advocate for something different, to actually shift the perception that we have about grief and looking at it from a different lens.
We have a similar mission, that is for sure. So, I think this is going to be a really great conversation. So, very sorry that you have had this experience. And could you just share with us what that scar has looked like for you?
Yeah, my oldest son, passed away after an 11-year battle with cancer in 2009. And then, of course, once we have our child pass away, it defies the natural order of things. And yes, I've had people tell me, you knew he was going to die, you knew he had this, you knew he had that. That still doesn't take away from actually witnessing and seeing your child die in front of you, slowly waste away when they have an illness. And it really shattered my world. It shattered who I thought I was. It shattered everything that I'd known. But not only that, I think because of the way society was and this expectation that you're going to bounce back, the funeral's over, get back to who you were. There is no getting back to who we were. And I actually spent 10 years of my life thinking that something was wrong with me, that I had to fix myself because all of a sudden I was doing grief wrong. And so I went into that self development. It's like, I got to fix my mindset. I got to do this. And in between all of that, I was presenting a mask to who I met. So there's this mask or pretending that we do, because I was a zombie actually. I went through the motions of life. I was on autopilot. And then when I got home, when I could take that mask off, it was like all of a sudden, it was when I was allowed to be who I was in pain. And words can't even describe the pain that someone feels, this rawness of anguish. And the reason I think I was longer in it is because there wasn't any support. Because the expectation is that, come on, we just bounce back to whoever we were because nobody recognizes loss. They do for that, we'll say that split second, right? It'll be days. You have this narrow aspect of, okay, it's a child. Maybe we'll give you a year. And no one really understands that the loss of a loved one stays with them. It doesn't go away.
Ever.
No.
And that's such a, there's so many misconceptions. And I think what you're saying is so true is that until you go through it, you really your eyes aren't really open to the gaps that really exist in the grief space and the misconceptions, the things that we were modeled or taught or told about grief, which wasn't much, but what we were told made us made me feel for sure, oh, I just go through these steps and then I get to this point and then I'm going to feel better and I'm going to have worked through all that. And s- did not match my reality. And I don't think it matches most people's reality of what we're really experiencing. And to your point, it just makes you feel like you're doing it wrong, which is a really hard thing to grasp on top of all of the very complex emotions that you're trying to process from the loss. And so it stacks, right? So it's just like one thing after another. So you mentioned support, which I think is a very hot topic with grief and grieving, but what did that look like in your life?
At the time, I had gone to this program, and realistically, you sat there and they taught about, yes, these are your feelings for now, and more about the 5 stages. I think a lot of people, whether it's faith-based or it's not, have this idea that grief has stages. We just go from one stage and then the next. It's like we're ticking a box. And a lot of people, and I know I dislike the word when people say you go through it. It's not like you're going to go through it and then all of a sudden you come out at the other end of the tunnel and it's voila, now it's rainbows and I'm better.
Yeah.
And rather than thinking that grief stays with us, I go that grief walks with us. And a lot of times, and I know we were talking about losses. So every day we have losses. And even in grief, when it is a traumatic experience of a loved one, it's the little things of waking up, of not seeing them at the table anymore, not hearing their laugh, not seeing their smile. And yes, I come from the point of a child loss, and my son was 27 when he passed away, and I'll still call him my child
Always.
because
Yes. Yeah.
always, right? And as a mom, I go, it doesn't matter how old, they are always your child.
What was your son's name?
Stefan,
Oh, I love that name.
right? So thank you. And it is, and I think a lot of times we forget that we experience losses on a daily basis. And then they start stacking up. And sometimes these losses are small losses. And yet we've never known how to deal with. And so again, when it becomes a big loss that shatters someone's world, everyone else is offering platitudes and cliches because that's what we've been taught. And I'm not going to speak for any other griever because what someone says lands differently for everyone. And we realize as the griever how words are so important and how we talk to someone. And sometimes I'll go, you know what? Sitting with someone in silence sometimes is way so much better than saying something, even though it may be well intended, lands in a way that becomes disrespectful.
Yeah. You are not alone in that experience. And I think I think almost everyone I've talked to and comments that I read, that's probably the number one thing that I hear is the support just doesn't look like what we thought it was going to. And I don't even know. So my sister passed away in 2018 in a fire at her home. So very suddenly. And I don't know that I had an idea of what the support would look like. I just remember really understanding the silence and the people that said nothing. Like the people that said something, I don't really remember the details of that or if it made me feel one way or the other. I do remember the people that I heard nothing from, nothing
Mm.
at all. And that's what stood out to me. And that's what really imprinted on me. And to your point, when we don't attend to these other losses in our life or allow ourselves, give ourselves permission to call it what it is, it doesn't go away and it will come up with each new loss you have. And for me, it really triggered an abandonment wound because my dad moved to Florida when we were in third grade after my parents got divorced. And to a young girl, that felt very much like abandonment. And so that was my wound that I carried. And so when I lost my sister and people in my life didn't show up like I thought, then that was just another example of people abandoning you. And I think that was the trigger for me to say, I have to go back and heal these things that I've never addressed because it was clear to me that it was not going to ever just resolve itself and it was going to continue to present problems.
Oh, Karen, thank you so much for sharing about your sister. And I'd love to honor her. What's her name?
Christy.
Christine.
Yep.
Mhm. And it's true. And that's another aspect of grief that is not talked about very often. Sibling loss, right? You're as a grieving mom, and yes, even that people don't want to talk about children who have passed away because they don't know what to say to a parent, and even less so to a sibling. And we find that people have this, I don't know, hierarchy of what grief is important. And realistically, there's no comparison in grief. Like your pain is not any more or less than, say, my pain or someone else who's lost their spouse. There's different nuances because of our relationship. And that I think sometimes people don't get in the sense of because they figure, oh, if it's sibling loss, then people should be feeling this way. If it's a child loss, this is how they should be feeling. If it's a spousal loss, this is how they should be feeling. And yet, even within that specific loss, how we're going to respond to it, how we're going to react to it, how we're going to have our grief journey is completely different, even though it might be the same person, because the relationship is so different. And I'm so glad that you brought up about the abandonment and the old wounds, because it really is. I know when my son passed away, all of a sudden things that were from my childhood or from years earlier rose up. Things that I thought I had dealt with.
Yeah.
Sometimes we think, oh yeah, I've taken the self-development course. I've dealt with this wound and I'm okay. And all of a sudden
All
something happens
yeah.
and it brings it up to the forefront. And you're like, we get back to almost that inner child that is hurt.
And doesn't it almost feel like part of the grief is that's what it's there to teach us, is to show you all the things that still need attended to? That's how it felt for me. It felt like there was this portal that opened, this door that opened to say, "We have brought you to your knees. Everything you knew is now shattered. Will you walk through this door and finally attend to the things that you haven't and realize what is really important in your life and how do you really want to show up going forward?" That's how it felt to me. I didn't have any words to describe it at the time, but that's how it felt.
It definitely brings you down to your knees, as you say, and you look at your priorities, your core values. And a lot of times, I think what we thought at one point, what we thought was important, we realize like it's petty. Like I know that I stopped having patience for people that I thought were frivolous. And again,
Mm.
what I consider frivolous may be what someone else doesn't. But just some of the conversations, and I belong to also a group, a grief alumni group. And what we find is that within our grief community, you can go into deep conversations. We share vulnerabilities rather than having these conversations that are on the surface. And yes, beforehand, I probably had these conversations too. And then no, I don't want these conversations anymore because really we want to talk about what really matters,
Yes.
what changes in your life. And it's about not presenting ourselves with the mask. I find now is that you want to find people or surround yourself with people who give you permission to be who you are without the mask. Because I think that's what happens in grief is that all of a sudden we become who we are. And it's our
Right?
se-
It just yeah, I mean, the like you said, the old self is gone, and so in that state of, "Who am I now?" It is a choice, right? It is a choice, but it is the greatest and I do call it a gift. Finding myself was a gift, and I don't believe I would have ever gotten there had I not experienced the loss of my sister. I don't think there would have been no reason to.
yeah. Yeah. And I always go, it's like we're balancing something. I don't like the word balancing so much, but in grief, sometimes we're balancing. And it's really about finding that harmony within
Yeah.
our own selves. Because I always go grief. And I know that people like to separate. They like to separate okay, this is our minds, what we're thinking, this is our body, what, and then our spirit, rather than thinking that it's intertwined. Because grief is from our heart, and that's what it is. It's from love. And so everything's intertwined, our thoughts, how it affects our body, and our spirit, our soul, however somebody wants to call it. And it's that harmony rather than trying to say, let's fit everything into separate little boxes and deal with it. And you're like, no, everything's so interconnected that we have to treat it as a whole, if that makes
Yep.
sense. I know some people, it's no, it has to be separated. Like I have to deal with the emotions. And I get it. That's one of the reasons why I always go, I was on a zombie for 10 years because I had been separating everything. And my body was actually showing because grief actually affected my health.
Oh,
Because
sure.
I think a lot of
Yeah.
us ignore because a lot of times what we can't express verbally shows up in our bodies, and our bodies are telling us something.
Like alerts. I always call it, or I always use the analogy of your car, driving your car down the road, and there's a light that comes on in the car. And it's one of those dashboard lights. You're like, okay, I'll see what that's about. And then you forget about it. And then it like comes on again. And you're like, oh, yeah, I need to check into that. Oh, yeah, I need to get that my car in and get it serviced or whatever. And then you just keep like ignoring it. And then all of a sudden it's like you're on the side of the road with smoke coming out of the hood and you have to pop the hood and actually get in there to see what's going on. And I feel like emotions are those alert systems, or they gently nudge us and it's, hey, there's something you need to pay attention to. And when we don't pay attention to it, when we ignore it, it comes back stronger each time until, like you said, usually it manifests and comes in a way that, is not beneficial, not healthy for us. And so I tried to be kind and to be gentle with this, but you were not paying attention. So here I am louder and stronger.
And it is, and each of us in our journey. I know one of the things sometimes people go, oh, you have to walk through grief, or I actually say we walk with grief, or grief walks with us. And we move forward with grief because it's the love that we're carrying. I think a lot of times when I know the first time I ever laughed or smiled, I felt guilty. I had someone had seen me laugh, and the first thing they said was, oh, you're better now. I didn't have a cold.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're treating grief as it's a cold, it's a virus, so you're just gonna get over it. And people don't understand that a lot of times, and this is one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for it, is because a lot of times, especially when we're years out or decades afterwards, there can be a memory, there can be a scent, there can be a song that all of a sudden will activate that response of when we feel like we're right there again. And really, it's important for people to know that's okay, that's natural, that's normal. We have this thing in society about let's hide everything. If we don't acknowledge it, it's not there.
Yeah. If only it were that easy. If only it were that easy.
Yeah.
You said something that really struck something within me, and that was when we lose somebody, how quickly, like I always used to say, I'm allergic to surface level now that I've gone through this. Like I couldn't do surface level anything anymore. And that was who I feel like I was then. And so when you say you lose who you are, when you've been operating in this way for so long, and then all of a sudden it's like you can't tolerate certain things anymore and it happens very quickly. And I found myself really isolating because I lost most of my friend group, which I had heard would happen, but I was like, not my friend group, but I did. And then just to meet new people, so surface level, right? Like those initial conversations and just that high level. And I'm like, I'm just not interested. Like I just couldn't get there. And so I really isolated and went within for a couple of years, which I now know looking back, I needed that time and that space because I was doing a lot of internal work. And it makes sense that I needed to be, alone to do that. But I came out on the other side of it and I was very clear on what I needed and wanted in the world. And it was deep. I need deep conversations. My relationships, it's going to be a small circle, but we're going deep. And that's been like one of the things I really love about what I discovered about myself.
Yeah, and you've touched upon, a lot. There are a few people that I've heard that still have supportive friends that are around them. Like yourself, I just they dropped in the sense of because a lot of times they don't understand the sadness. And also about that, after a while, as you said, it's tiring being around surface people. It's
Mhm.
tiring of pretending that everything is fine. And also, as you said, sometimes the circle of friends, it's a small group now. However, it's about being who we really are and about having these, like we're having now, like these conversations that go on a deeper level and where you can be true to yourself. And I think a lot of times is that so much of society is still functioning on that surface level. Because when you can go deeper, this is where I find is where we have compassion for other people. I know for me, my faith not deepened. I use my faith as an example at times of understanding certain aspects of life that I may not have understood before. I've always been a compassionate person. That became deeper in the sense of all of a sudden, it's like looking at addiction and totally understanding that all of us have a breaking point and we don't know what it is. And I always go, I was very fortunate that to me, I didn't turn in that form of addiction because a lot of times we just want to dull the pain.
Oh,
People
yeah.
want to
Numb
dull the
it,
pain.
dull it. Yeah, absolutely. It's too much.
Yeah.
It can become too much. And I think I always lean on the dual model of grief processing where you're intentionally oscillating between being in the grief and then intentionally avoiding the grief for periods of time to give yourself just a break from it and to give yourself the ability to just focus on something else. And I think when you do that in a really intentional and structured way, it works really well. But when we don't do it in an intentional way and we're either in the grief all the time, which is too much. It's just too much for anybody to be in the grief all the time. But the opposite of that is just complete avoidance and not dealing with it at all. And neither of those are really going to get us to a space of integrating the grief, which is what I really think. I think it's about integrating the grief because it is the love. And that's when you can carry it forward when it's integrated in you. And you don't have to pick one or the other.
And I love how you said, because I also use the in between in a different way. I use it where we're in the in between where we're yearning for what was. We're
Mhm.
yearning for the life that we knew beforehand, before this tragedy, before this loss. And we're afraid to move forward because it is unknown. And there's also that aspect about, and now the word healing can mean different things. I used to dislike it at when my son passed away at in the rawness of it and when I was in the in between because healing to me at the time felt like I would forget about him and moving forward or moving on meant I had to leave him behind. And I think in some ways we're hanging on to that, not realizing that moving forward, the memory, the remembrance, their essence comes with us. They are not forgotten. And a lot of times, that's, I think, where sometimes this fear is because all of a sudden we're questioning so much about what our identity is, what our role is, because that has now shattered. And it's finding that balance or that harmony of where we can move forward and know that, yes, we've changed, acknowledging that change. And really, people say acceptance. And I always go, It's not acceptance of who died. We already know who died.
Yeah.
Grievers know who died. It's the acceptance, I think, of our own selves in saying, this is who I am becoming. And now accepting that I am who I am and not putting a label to it.
Yeah, I think the more that I am in this space, and we both have gone through and gotten our grief educator certification and went through that training, and you have the lived experience and then the education, and then you're out here being an you're activist and you're advocating. So we're in this space a lot, right? We're in this space of grief and loss a lot. So we have a lot to think about, right? I feel like I'm always just thinking about grief and loss, but I'm really starting to understand that it's for us, right? Like that there's something in grief that's for us. And there's so much in our life before we have loss happen to us that feels like we know about death, but it just feels so abstract to us. It's in our mind, we just make up a story that it won't ever happen to us. Oh, that happens to everybody else, right? But I have permanence in my life. And when you have a loss, and it's a loss of somebody that, was embedded in your daily life, nothing shatters your understanding of existence and how the world works like that. And I
Mm.
think that's where it just really it blows everything up. And so everything's up for question, right? Like your identity, your relationships, your purpose, your values, like everything comes up for evaluation because everything you thought you knew about how the world worked has just been proven that's not it.
And that is so true. I think sometimes I always found I used to talk about death beforehand, not so much with my son. The topic of death has always fascinated me in the sense of where do we go? Will I feel anything? Well, right? I mean, that
Yeah,
kind of, even as a child, I always wanted to know what happens afterwards.
me too.
And the amazing thing was, I was okay with my own death. It's amazing. It's okay, I die. However, I think grief really is about the people who survive. It's about what is left for them. Like, how do they pick up the pieces? And that's one of the reasons I think the Japanese do, I can't remember the term for it. I know it starts with a K, that when a vase breaks, they actually put it back together with the pieces and they put it with gold. So that it's a reminder that the shattered pieces are beautiful. And I think when we look at it as grief, when we ourselves have, we're not broken, but we feel like we're broken. And we feel that we're shattered because our world has shattered.
Yeah.
And so when we become who we are, that is like having the gold in us, that light that shines. And in some ways, and I think this is the way I took it. I know when my son passed away, and yes, I'm always grateful that I did have him for 27 years, even though during that time I blamed myself. Like, why couldn't I find a cure for cancer? Why couldn't I? Because there is this aspect of we want to control things. So we
Oh yeah.
always looking for what could I have done differently? What didn't I do? What? So that is also part of grief. But the other aspect of grief is that when allow it to become part of us, of who we become, we allow that light to shine to help for others. I know when my son passed away, I would always look at there are children that pass away every single day. And there's children around the world, and even today, that are passing away from starvation, that pass away because they don't have the medications. I think about my son, even though he had cancer, we did have the specialist, we did have the doctors, we did. And so people die from different reasons. And I always go, it's not so much how they died. That now becomes irrelevant. It's really about the person and the legacy that we are carrying forward for them.
In their honor. And I think that's such an important topic to talk about because what you said before was so true. And so many of us, it's just we naturally fall into this place of have to stay here because I'm honoring and I'm being loyal. And the sadness really then demonstrates to the world how much this person meant to me. And there's absolutely time when that's all that needs to happen, right? I call it the free fall of grief, acute grief. There's a time period where there's nothing to learn, there's nothing to integrate, there's nothing to balance or harmonize. It's just raw and real, and there's nothing to be done. But for me, when I was able to really think about my sister and like what made her so special and unique, and my sister was she had a lot of struggles in her life. She really had a lot of things that she struggled with throughout her whole life. But she was such a caring and compassionate person. I would be at my house and like the doorbell would ring and I'd get a delivery and I'd open it up and it'd be like a swimsuit cover up and a pair of sunglasses and like my favorite book. Like she was so good at giving gifts and she would just do it for no reason. She just really loved to make other people feel special. And I wasn't a very compassionate person before she passed away. I was a nice person, but I didn't really understand compassion. But she did. And so I really integrated that piece of my sister, that character and that trait of my sister into myself. And every time I show up now in life with compassion, which is daily, especially in the work that I do, I'm channeling her. Like I'm bringing that's her. Like she's in me. She lives in me. She lives in my heart and she helps me to carry that part of her forward. And that is so special. Feels really special.
That is, and it's a beautiful tribute and honor, right? And I think a lot of times, as you say, there's that intent to choose. And at first, we may not realize that because, in some ways, when we're in the acute grief and we're hurting and we're in pain, that's all that we can see. And a lot of times, because we know that life goes on, but it's hard when the world keeps continuing on and something has changed your world.
So
And
significantly.
um,
So significantly.
and a lot of times, sometimes we may want to find answers. And I always go, there'll never be any answer that will be satisfying.
Because they're not here. The only answer, right, that could be beneficial is if it was an answer that brought them back.
Yeah. And that doesn't happen, unfortunately. I always go, if I had a magic wand, I'm sure if there was one, we'd all would have used it.
Yes. Right away. Yeah.
And it is because a lot of times when we're thinking about intent, that comes to a point when I know for myself, and I can't remember when it was, but it was years later, closer to the 10-year mark when I had tried to fix myself and all of these things. And I was looking at myself in the mirror and really not recognizing who was staring back. Because it's like this you're going through the motions. And even though you're thinking you got to fix yourself, you got to do this, the person that was staring back was empty. It was devoid of any emotion, almost, yeah, devoid of emotions, even though there was the sadness and all these other emotions that sometimes I don't even think there's a, I mean, there's an emotional wheel, but at the time we don't even have words for what we're feeling and everything's hitting all at once. And I know for me, it was when I was looking at myself thinking, why do I think that grief has to go away? And when I, with intent, chose that grief is with me, I'm not going anyplace. I'm not going to apologize anymore for being a grieving mom. I'm not going to apologize that I'm missing my child. I'm not going to apologize anymore or hide behind what I think everybody else wants. And that was when, to me, it was like it was integrated. It's now grief is walking with me. And I know that there's a picture sometimes that I like using. It's about the jar, and I think it's a ball that's inside. And the grief looks so big because the jar is smaller. And a lot of times people think this is what we talk grief gets smaller, time heals, you just let time go. And it's no, it's not that the grief gets any smaller. We get larger because of love. We now have the capacity to hold love and loss together. And
Mhm.
that's really my message is all about. It's about how do we hold it? How do we hold the love and the loss together where we're honoring ourselves of who we've become and also honoring our loved ones?
Yes. And that's what's possible. And I think that's what's so important to have these conversations because society isn't having these conversations. As a society, we're given certain messages. We have been given certain messages. And this is why we're in the state that we are with grief, is because we haven't shown up strong enough to challenge it. We haven't, I don't think we've used our voice in a way that we all need to say, we're not doing this anymore. We're not doing grief this way anymore. This isn't working for anybody. And it's the one experience that nobody escapes from. Doesn't it make sense to lean in and understand it, to understand grief just in general, but then your own grief and then how you can best support other people? To me, it's a very interesting paradox that we've gotten ourselves into. It's the one thing that like nobody escapes, but it's the one thing that like has kept people have just kept at an arm's distance and kept in the dark. And it's like that time is I feel like that time's passed. To me, it just feels like something is shifting, and that's just not going to be an option anymore.
And you're so right. It is shifting. I know I've had women who've actually have said to me, like, they fully seen now that they haven't because I'm witnessing who they are. And because I've become so vocal, I have women who experienced grief 20, 30 years ago that now are sharing what they've experienced and have kept hidden for so long because basically society went, yeah, you can't talk about that. We don't want to hear it. And you are so right, Karen, in regards about now is the time where we're becoming more vocal. We, like you and I, we're being vocal and we are educating people what the face of grief looks like. You and I have both experienced grief and we can still thrive in life and honor our grief, honor our loved ones in a way that becomes part of us rather than saying, oh no, I got to separate that aspect of me. I got to hide that and repress it. And I'm sure you have probably felt the same way too about sometimes we've repressed wounds so deep that at times it's something else that happens, and it could be a small thing that all of a sudden sort of bursts that dam, and we don't have the tools to know how to give ourselves compassion and support because the others around us sometimes don't. You and I know how to give support because this is what we're trained for now. And so,
Mm.
definitely, I think because there's more and more of people like ourselves who are being vocal, who are saying, we've walked this, we get you.
Yeah.
And offering support. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think part of being vocal and using our voice is and part of what happens when you go through this and you're broken open and you're finding yourself again, you're supposed to be because you're supposed to be able to finally tap into what do I want in life? What do I need? Like with other people in my life, what are my standards? What are my values? What do I need from those that are going to support me in grief? And we haven't been modeled that. We haven't really been given permission to do that. And in grief, I feel like it was the first time for me that I actually had the time and the space and the understanding that this is something I have to figure out. I have to figure out this now. I was 48 at the time. Relationships were not going great. Very successful in other areas of my life, but with relationships, it was always romantic relationships. It was always really tricky and ended up attracting narcissists. And it's okay. Something's got to change. That's what I just remember. I was like, something has to change. And I'm like, but I need to know me at a really deep level so that I can understand what do I need, not not what I've always just done and just followed the leader and just did what everybody else thought I should do and got in line and did those things. This is my time to really understand me. And when I did that, I was able to understand with the grief, what do I need from people? And that's very unique. That's not going to be the same for everybody. And once I figured that out, like for me, it was I need to talk about so I've lost my mom, my dad, and my sister. I'm the only one left in my origin family. And with my dad, it was really difficult because he and I were very close and he was the last person in my family. And so it hit me really hard. And I remember, oh, I need to advocate for what I need. And it was three things. And I needed to carve out time to talk about him every week for just a period of time, just to talk and remember him and laugh about who he was and the person that, that what he brought into our lives, which was always humor. My dad was so funny. I need a lot more hugs, which that doesn't come I'm not my love language is acts of service, so I'm not one that was gonna say, "I need a hug," but I knew I needed more of that physical touch. And then the third thing was I just needed to never feel broken. Not today, not next week, not in 10 years. Because I'm like, "It's gonna hit. It's gonna hit over and over again, and when it does, I just my family, I need you to know I'm not broke yet. I'm okay. I'm actually processing this in a really healthy way, but just please never make me feel like there's something wrong with me." And because I knew myself on a really deep level, I was able to share that, and it was such a gift to the people who wanted to support me because then they knew exactly. There was no guessing. They knew exactly what I needed, and they're like, "We can do that." We can absolutely do that for you. And it was really beautiful how, you realized so often we're upset with people for not showing up for us the way that we need them to. And then it's, are we showing up for ourselves and knowing ourselves in a way that we can then share that with other people?
I love how you said that because that is so true. A lot of times we don't get the support that we want. And sometimes we don't even know what kind of support that we want. This expectation that, yes, our family and our friends will rally around us and they'll always be there and giving us support. And it's so beautiful that you knew that when we get deeper of the support that we need, doesn't happen right away. But you're right. We get to set the boundaries of what we will accept and what we don't accept. And it really starts with us. I always go, it starts with us to give our own compassion to ourselves first. We're
Mhm.
really good at giving compassion to other people and not to ourselves. And this is one of the reasons why have a care framework. And part of that sometimes is, and I know I was just talking with some people about this, is about sometimes even forgiving ourselves for what we think we didn't do or how we didn't show up. But you're so right. It's how are we showing up for ourselves first?
Yeah. And
That,
it's that you had to put your oxygen mask on first. And again, that's another one of those things that we say, but until you have gone through it, you really understand what that means and why that's so vitally important. And the people who love you are appreciative of that. They're like, I want to support you." And most of the people in our life, they really do. There's a lot that people experience with grief that taps into their own insecurities, fears, their own triggers. And so a lot of times I tell people, it's not about you. What you're feeling, I understand the feeling, absolutely understand it. It's not about you. They're processing and dealing with their own fears and limitations around this. And it's just showing up in a way that makes you feel very isolated and alone.
yes. And even for people that don't have, because it does take listening to your inner whispers to know what it is that you need and to set those boundaries. And a lot of times, even the support may not come from people that we're familiar with, like our family or friends, because there is that line that said, families and friends become strangers and strangers become family and friends. Because sometimes someone else who has experienced grief will know how to give support. And a
Yeah.
lot of times, especially at the beginning, I mean, I think I did. I thought my family would support me forever, but sometimes they're kind of the first ones to look going, yeah, when are you getting back to who you were? Like, are you
Yeah.
stuck? Stuck. And sometimes we may have friends that are well intentioned that will go, but I liked you better how you were before. And you're kind of like, but that's not coming back.
Yeah.
And you're so true. It's about learning what your boundaries are. And at times, we don't know how to set those boundaries.
Yeah, and I think we all would say and agree time in and of itself doesn't heal. It's what you do with the time that is healing, and I think so much of it is just about learning. It's about learning again about grief in general, about your grief, about who you are, about what's really important to you. Because, like we said, nothing really wakes you up to what's really important in life as losing what you thought was never going to go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I started something recently called the Living List Party, where we have bucket list and we think about those big things that we want to do before we die and check it off and cross it off the list. But I'm like, what about a living list? Why aren't we more focused on a living list to say, now that I've gone through this and I know how fragile life is and I know how quickly things can change, like, how do I want to live every day and show up fully so that I can get to a point in my life where I'm like, you know what? I don't have all those regrets. I don't have all those woulda, coulda, shouldas. Because I'm aware of what I want and I'm living it every day.
That is so excellent. And I love that you brought that up. And I know that sometimes when people think of the bucket list, it's always, as you say, these big things that I got to accomplish and stuff. And when you're having that living list, I always look at it's about the most simplest of things sometimes. It's,
Mhm.
I always use coffee because I like coffee. And I always go, sometimes just sitting and enjoying a good cup of coffee is a pleasure, or going out or watching a sunset or a sunrise. Like it's doesn't have to be these big aspects or big dreams. It's when we're thinking of daily life. What do we do on a daily basis that we can enjoy? Even sometimes washing the dishes, because you can meditate while you're washing the dishes. And I always go, and when you're taking that shower, feel
Mhm.
the water that's really there, of how it hits our bodies and things like that. And I know I break it down to the most simplest of mundane
I do
tasks.
too. I do too, because I think that's the other thing it wakes you up to is how simple things can be. We like to make it complicated, and I'm like at the front of that line to complicate things when they don't need to. But when I really get down to it, when I look back and think about my journey, most of the most impactful things were so simple. Meditation, breath work, like really being able to recalibrate my nervous system and be aware when it was going off track and then how to get it back on track. Going out in nature without music, without podcasts, just listening to what's going on around me and being aware of, oh, that tree changed from yesterday, right? Like when I went on my walk yesterday, there was nothing blooming and today it's blooming. Just being so present and aware is such a gift. And I think loss just helps slow that down because on such a microwave society, right? Everything fast. And I feel like
Uh,
for me, it was like, we're going to slow things down and we're going to keep things simple. Like even materialistic things just lost its, yes, I still like to buy things, but it changed. I just, I no longer like, I don't want a bunch of stuff. I wanted everything to be simple.
yeah, totally get that. And I think you and I would have a great time walking because I do the same thing. Sometimes I look out my window and I can see these trees and I love the shape. And I look, so where I live, and someone mentioned that to someone going, trees and grass have different shades of green. And they're like, they do?
Yeah.
Mm, I yeah, I live in a place where each tree is a different shade of green. And they're like, "I thought green was green." And we're like, "There are different shades. Like,
Many
look at a
shades.
flower. You can see the." And so it is so true. And I think I always go, it's the same thing sometimes when we're looking at even in the grief aspect. There are people that have started large movements, right? And sometimes it's not even about the large movements. It's about how do we even impact our community,
Mm.
right? The people around us. And that's where we start. We start about how do we show people what grief looks like? What do we need? What support? How do you support someone else? How can we talk to someone who's in grief? I always say the standard joke, if I want to empty a room, I just have to start talking about my son and just say I'm a grieving mom. Yes, I'm saying that as a joke, but I'm saying it in a way that says, look, people are still so afraid about speaking about our loved ones, speaking about being our losses. And yet I go, but people can talk about a trip that they took 20 years ago. I know I was talking to someone about a trip that I'd taken 25 years ago, and that's acceptable. And
Mhm.
so, what's it not acceptable about talking about our loved ones who have passed away? We're just sharing stories. We're not asking, and it's okay. I always go, it's okay if someone cries. It's okay for someone to show emotion. It's not pity that we want, it's not sympathy. We're sharing. And all we want is acknowledgement of saying, wow, thank you so much for sharing about your loved one. What an amazing person. I'm so sad that I didn't get to meet them.
It's that simple. It really is that simple. We're so afraid that the world's going to forget about them. We can't forget about them. But that is a real fear of people who have gone through loss and are grieving is we see the world moving on. And our biggest fear is everyone's just going to forget who they were. And when we post things online, I've had people say, oh, that was really attention seeking. It's the last thing I want is attention over my sister's death or my mom or my dad. I share because that's how I honor them. That's how I keep their memory alive, and I want people to come to me and say, "I loved your mom. She was my teacher in 1st grade, and she was the best teacher that I had, and she taught me this one thing, and I'll never forget it." That keeps her alive in my heart, and that's I feel like that's what most people in grief want. It's just gotten so misconstrued about what's really important, and that's I'm with you. We have to go back to the basics. We have to go back to the basics with grief and just level set on definitions and the different types of grief and, you know, what we really need to move through, how we need to witness and process our griefs and resolve these old wounds and all of that. And there's such a big opportunity for people to learn. And I think once you start to learn about this, it really does shift how you show up and how you feel about grief. It's just we haven't been afforded the gift of learning and understanding with grief because it just was kept so pushed away.
So true. And I think this is why it's so important to have the peer to peer support of someone who, because I'm not too sure if counselors or therapists have changed. But really, when they've gone to education, they still follow the old rules of how everyone's taught. People have to get over it. You give them tools to, rather than saying, these are the tools that, yes, we navigate life because life's going to happen anyways. But we have tools to navigate when something activates you. You want to be acknowledged, you want to be witnessed for what you've experienced, and you want to be able to share the stories about your loved one. I loved how you said about your mom's the teacher. And then I'm kind of like, I'm curious. But what grade did she teach? How long was she
Yeah,
teaching?
it does. It brings up that, right? Like I mean, yeah, that's absolutely it's a conversation starter.
Yeah. And that is so like, we should not be afraid to say, this is what they did, and to ask questions and to be curious about what type of person they were. What kind of person were they? And I think that is so important because we want to share their essence. Because
Mhm.
we are part of their essence. Whether it was a friend, whether it was a family member, it's so important to me, anyways. And like you, I have family that don't even talk about my son at all. They don't bring up his name, they don't, nothing. And I don't even want to be around him. And it's not
Right.
because here, it's not that I don't care for my family. It's why did you forget about my son? You're his uncles, you're his aunts. We can talk about him. It's okay.
And I think that's why community is so important, right? Like with grief, community is so important. And we used to grieve in community. That's how we were supposed to grieve. And we've gotten away from that. And it's gotten very isolated and very individualized and very on your own.
Ye-
And so when you can be in a community, in a group, and it doesn't have to be everybody's experienced the same thing as you have, because like we said, grief is grief. It's nuanced. It's different, but grief is grief. And the community aspect of it, I'm finding is just been such the missing piece that we can bring community back and we can bring a better understanding of what grief is and what it isn't. And we can learn how to process our grief and how to talk about it, how to support each other. We could change, like, this could change life. It could change the world. That's how strongly I feel about it. Like, really.
Definitely. I think you and I both, this is one of the reasons, even before I became an educator, was about we how we're doing grief, I felt wasn't correct in the sense of it was stifling. It was repressing people in grief. And I firmly believe that it needs to be out in the open. It needs to be made a topic that is comfortable to be able to share, like all the other topics that we're talking about
Yeah.
when you think. And sure, sometimes maybe the conversation that you're having isn't with the right person. And that could be with any conversations. I always go, people talk sometimes more openly about sex than they do about grief, or people talk about money. Grief should be one of those topics that you can have a conversation. S- Have a and it really starts with curiosity.
It really does, and like that, like you said, like, you leaned in, right, when I was talking about my mom, and that's it, let's just lean in. Let's lean in and be curious because this person is in your life, and like you said, they're a product of so many other people that came before, and isn't that interesting? Don't we wanna understand more about that? Like, how did you become who you are? And, "Oh, well, tell me about your mom and dad," and that's one of the things that's on my living list is to have more conversations with my own family and my own kids just about who we are. Again, deep, going deep. But that's one of the things with my parents. I love my parents. I had a good relationship with my parents. I didn't know my parents to the level that I really wish that I did. And that's something that I can't ever go back and know them more like from them.
Yeah.
I can hear from other people, and again, that's why I think it's so comforting when people share about them because it helps me know them even more. But I
Yes.
wanna make sure, like, at the dinner table, what's your fears? What are you so excited about? What do you feel like you can give back to the world? What did I do as a mom that you wish I would have done differently? I wanna know all of it. I want at the end of my life, I want my kids to be like, "We knew her. We
Yeah.
got her. We knew her really well."
And the nice aspect is what I find is that each person that interacts has a different story or a different take of how we see someone. You and I have this interaction, and we're going to see ourselves or each other in one way. Our children see ourselves in another way. Our friends have different stories because a lot of times where we're going with our friends is different than where we are with our children at times. And it really does. I like yourself, I did that to someone else. I posted something about my son, and someone else then had posted of when they had gone to college together. And it was a story that I didn't even know.
Oh, I love that.
Right. So this and but those are too far and few in between.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what I think we're hoping, right, to get out into the world is and of course, there'll be somebody somebody will ask about them and they won't get the response that they thought they would get and that could shut people down, which again is why it's so important for the griever to share how they wanna be supported. But For most people in grief, asking about, the person we lost or sharing a story is going to bring joy. It's going to bring up, like, "Oh, I didn't know that, or I did remember that. Oh, yeah." It's just that connection point back. And for me, it's just always like the smile comes up and the smile comes on. And I'm just like, I really am grateful that I got to have just a bit of them again today.
It does, and I always go, even though it brings both up. It
Yeah.
brings joy up because 'cause we're hearing the stories, and it brings sadness up too, and I think people need to understand that it's okay to have both emotions and to feel them. If you see someone when you're bringing up someone's a story or a memory and they have tears in their eyes, it's a tear of sadness because they're missing them, but it's also tears of joy because someone else is sharing that
Mhm.
experience with.
The memory is once again alive. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know
We
you and
have a lot in common.
I
We have a lot in common, and I really appreciate you being here today. I guess just the last question that I wanted to get your insight on is, if you could go back to who you were when you lost your son and you could share some of the wisdom that you know now, what's the one thing that you would share?
that I'm not alone, that you're never alone, and that I carry my son with me. What about yourself?
Oh, that's a
What's some
beautiful message. I think I would say to myself, things are going to get really hard, and you're going to think you're going even further down, deeper than you thought was possible. And that's intentional because on the other side of it, you're going to come through this as the best, really the best version of who you are. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and this is one of the aspects I think with grief. We don't know who we're going to become, and I do truly believe that when we have the intent that we accept grief for what it is, that it's love, we strive to be the best version of who we become.
It's really how it feels. Like the person I am today is almost unrecognizable from who I was before. And it wasn't that I was a horrible person, but I was so weighed down and concerned with everybody's opinions and judgments and pick me and validate me and all of those things. And when I went through this journey and I realized everything I wanted was already within me, then I just got to show up as like, finally, this is me. And I love all of me. And I know there's parts of me that need to be tempered. I know that. But it's still me, and so I love all the parts of me, and when you reach that level of unconditional love, there's not there's not a whole lot that can knock me off of that. I get knocked off, but I get quickly back on. It's how we respond, and we end up responding versus reacting, and it's not that I'm positive all the time, I have bad days, but I just enjoy life. I really do enjoy life. I love myself, and I love what I'm doing in the world, and I love people, and I love meeting people, and I love helping people, I love serving people, and I love life. I just really love life, and that's not how I felt before.
Yeah, and I can resonate with that. And there was another aspect when you said about the days. And really it's about let the day be the day. It's not and like yourself, I think for me, I'm now more fully present in
Yes.
the present. I think beforehand, as you say, it's about thinking about all the stuff that happened in the past. And this is before my son died. And then always figuring out, oh, the future, like where this and that. And yes,
Aw.
we have plans for the future of where we want to be. There's the vision, except we're not living in the future. We still know what we want in the future. However, we're fully present today to activate that life in the future.
Which is the gift. The presence is the gift. Yep. Yeah. Beautiful conversation. Thank you so much. This is going to help so many people, just your perspective and your sharing. And we thank you for coming on and just sharing your heart. Really special.
An honor. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thanks, everyone.